They called me the filth in a room full of $3,000 suits. My brother laughed the loudest. My mother stayed the quietest. And my ex-boyfriend clapped like he was watching a circus act. None of them knew that right beneath their polished shoes, this entire building stood on a paper trap I had set months ago. The moment my brother raised his glass to a brilliant future was the exact second I pressed the button to bring it all crashing down. My name is Briar Callahan, and I had been standing in the grand ballroom of the Northlake Meridian Hotel in Cleveland for exactly 9 minutes before I realized my brother intended to turn me into the evening's entertainment. I was 33 years old, and I stood out like a fresh bruise on perfect skin. Around me, the room swirled with the kind of aggressive wealth that demands to be noticed. Men in bespoke suits that cost more than my first car clustered in tight circles, discussing market shares and acquisition costs. Women in silk and chiffon drifted between them, their jewelry catching the light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. And then there was me. I had come straight from the site. There was gray dust from crushed limestone settled into the creases of my work jacket, and my steel-toed boots still held stubborn clumps of dried mud from the retention pond we had been grading since 6 in the morning. I had tried to brush it off in the parking lot, but some stains go deeper than fabric. They settle into your identity, or at least, that is what my family seemed to believe. My brother, Gavin Callahan, was the reason we were all here. He was 37 years old and currently standing on a raised platform at the front of the room, holding a glass of champagne like it was a scepter. This was his night, the merger party, the celebration of his company swallowing up a smaller competitor to solidify his status as the new king of corporate finance in Ohio. He looked the part. I had to give him that. His teeth were whitened to a blinding standard. His hair was swept back with precision, and his smile was practiced enough to hide the shark swimming behind his eyes. I tried to blend into the shadows near a column, hoping to make a brief appearance, nod at my parents, and leave before the air became too thin to breathe. But Gavin had eyes like a hawk spotting a field mouse. He tapped the microphone. The sound system whined slightly, silencing the room instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues," Gavin's voice boomed, smooth and confident. "Tonight is about the future. It is about growth. But to appreciate where we are going, we have to remember where we came from." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I saw his gaze sweep the room and lock onto me. It was not a look of affection. It was the look a predator gives when it decides to play with its food. "And speaking of where we came from," Gavin said, his grin widening, "I see my baby sister made it. Briar, come up here. Don't be shy." The spotlight swung. It hit me with the physical force of a slap. 200 heads turned. I could hear the collective intake of breath as they took in my appearance, the work boots, the heavy canvas pants, the messy bun that was coming undone after a 12-hour shift. I did not move. "Come on now," Gavin beckoned, stepping down from the stage and walking toward me, forcing the crowd to part. He reached me and clamped a hand on my shoulder. His grip was hard, painful even, but his face was a mask of brotherly joviality. He dragged me toward the center of the room. "Look at this. You know, I told Briar the party started at 7 in the evening, but I think she is still operating on labor time. You just clocked out, didn't you, Briar?" A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. It was nervous at first, but it grew louder as they realized Gavin was inviting them to mock me. "This is dedication, folks," Gavin announced to the room, gesturing at my dirty boots. "While I was closing a deal worth $40 million this afternoon, Briar here was probably digging a hole. That is the Callahan diversity for you. One of us builds empires, and the other one plays in the mud. I guess someone has to handle the filth so the rest of us can stay clean, right?" The laughter was genuine now. It was that sharp, braying sound of a herd that has identified the runt. They were laughing because they were relieved they were not the ones standing there. They were laughing because Gavin was rich and powerful, and laughing with him felt like a safe investment. I looked at the faces in the front row. My mother, Marla, stood next to my father. She was wearing a silver gown that was too tight, her neck stiff. She did not look at me. She stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. There was no outrage in her eyes, no protective maternal instinct flaring up to stop her son from humiliating her daughter. There was only a resigned acceptance. Her expression said it clearly. This is what you get. Briar. You chose to be difficult. You chose to be low. Standing next to her was Celeste, Gavin's wife. She held a flute of sparkling water, her manicured fingers resting lightly on the stem. She leaned in toward the woman next to her, but her voice was pitched perfectly to drift in my direction. You have to admire her confidence, Celeste said, a smile plastering her face that did not reach her eyes. I mean, wearing that here? It is so brave. It really suits her, though it fits the whole manual labor aesthetic she is so committed to. Gavin finally let go of my shoulder, giving me a dismissive pat on the back that felt more like he was dusting off his hands after touching something unclean. Go get a drink, Briar, he said, his voice dropping just low enough that only I could hear the venom. Try not to touch the upholstery. I did not say a word. I did not cry. I did not run. I simply stepped back, creating a physical distance between myself and his cologne, which smelled of cedar and arrogance. As the crowd turned their attention back to Gavin, who was now launching into a toast about synergy and market dominance, another figure stepped into my line of sight. Nolan Rusk. I had not seen Nolan in 2 years, not since he told me that my lack of ambition was suffocating him. He looked good, in the way a sports car looks good, until you realize the engine is leased. He wore a navy suit that fit too well, and he held his drink with the practiced ease of someone who spends every night networking. Briar, he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an assessment. He looked me up and down, lingering on the dust on my jacket. I see Gavin wasn't exaggerating. You really are still down in the trenches. Hello, Nolan, I said, my voice steady. It is a big night for the family, he said, swirling his drink. I just closed a portfolio acquisition myself. Gavin and I were talking earlier. We might be partnering up on the next phase. It is amazing what you can achieve when you aim high, isn't it? You should try it sometime. The view is better from up here. He waited for me to snap back. He wanted me to be defensive. He wanted proof that I was bitter, that I regretted the life I had built, that I was pining for the hollow success he and Gavin worshipped. But I was distracted. I was watching Gavin. He was back on the stage now, basking in the applause, but from my angle, just off to the side, I could see what the audience could not. Gavin was terrified. His smile was fixed, a rictus of confidence, but his eyes were darting around the room, checking the exits, checking the faces of the waiters, checking his phone which he had placed on the podium. Every time the screen lit up, his hand twitched. When he raised his glass for the final toast, the liquid inside trembled. It was a subtle vibration, barely visible, but to someone who works with structural integrity, it was a screaming alarm bell. Structures do not shake unless the foundation is unstable. Gavin wasn't celebrating a victory, he was celebrating an escape. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon not to win a medal, but to outrun a pack of wolves. I shifted my weight, and my eyes drifted past Gavin to the wall behind him. The North Lake Meridian was a beautiful hotel, renovated 3 years ago. It was known for its seamless integration of modern luxury and environmental responsibility. There, mounted on the wall just to the right of the stage, was a small, brushed brass plaque. Most people would never read it. It was background noise, but I knew every word etched into the metal. North Lake Meridian, Environmental Innovation Award, recognizing excellence in sustainable rainwater harvesting and subterranean drainage infrastructure. They saw the brass. They saw the award. They did not see the name of the lead engineer on the project because it was listed in the technical filings, not on the decorative wall. They did not know that the reason this basement ballroom did not flood during the spring thaw was because I had spent 3 weeks calculating the hydraulic load and redesigning the outflow pipes. I looked at the floor beneath Gavin's feet. I knew exactly what was under the concrete. I knew the pipe diameter. I knew the stress rating of the rebar. I knew how the water flowed when the storms came. My family looked at me and saw dirt. They saw a woman who played in the mud, a failure who could not cut it in the boardroom. They thought the mud was something to be ashamed of. They thought it was filth. But they were wrong. Mud is what happens when earth meets water. It is dense. It is heavy. And if you are not careful, if you stand in one place too long while pretending to be something you are not, it is exactly what pulls you under. Gavin raised his glass higher, his hand still shaking. "To the future!" he shouted. To the future. The room echoed. I touched the rough fabric of my pocket where my phone sat silent. I looked at Gavin, then at my mother, who was clapping with hollow enthusiasm, and finally at Nolan, who was already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. I let a very small, very cold smile touch my lips. If they wanted to see me as the girl who plays in the mud, that was fine. I would embrace it, because what Gavin did not realize was that you cannot build a skyscraper on a sinkhole, and I was the only one in the room who knew exactly where the ground was about to give way. He wanted to bury me in insults. I was going to use that same dirt to bury his entire fake reputation. I took a breath of the recycled air, turned my back on the stage, and walked toward the exit. The real work was just beginning. I stepped out of the ballroom and into the cooler, quieter air of the main corridor, letting the heavy oak doors swing shut behind me. The muffled sound of applause faded, replaced by the hum of the central HVAC system. I took a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of commercial cleaner and expensive lilies. To the people in that room, I was Briar the failure, Briar the disappointment, Briar, who wasted her potential playing in the dirt while her brother conquered the skyline. They saw the mud on my boots and assumed poverty. They saw the calluses on my hands and assumed struggle. They were wrong. They did not know about Hearthline Works. They did not know that the company name on the side of the 3 trucks parked in my warehouse lot belonged to me. They did not know that I was not just a laborer. I was the lead engineer and sole owner of a firm that specialized in sustainable urban drainage and green infrastructure. I spent my days calculating flow rates, negotiating municipal contracts, and designing systems that kept neighborhoods from flooding during the heavy Ohio storms. Last year, Hearthline Works cleared a revenue that would have made my father choke on his scotch. I had 16 employees, a dedicated crew of subcontractors, and a reputation in the city for solving problems that the big firms were too lazy to touch. But I never told my family, not a word, not when I landed my first city contract, and not when I bought my own house in cash 2 years ago. I kept it a secret because I knew them. If I told them I was successful, the dynamic would not shift to respect. It would shift to expectation. They would not love me more. They would just expect me to pay for things. I wanted a family who loved me even if I was nothing. But after 33 years, I was beginning to accept that the data did not support that hypothesis. I walked down the hallway, my boots thudding softly against the thick carpet. I stopped by the atrium, where a massive living wall of ferns and moss climbed 3 stories high, fed by a trickling waterfall that disappeared into a bed of river stones. I smiled, a dry, humorless thing. I knew this wall. I knew the pump system behind the slate cladding was a variable speed unit imported from Germany. I knew the drainage mat behind the soil pockets was exactly 2 inches thick. My company had not installed it directly, but I had designed the schematic for the subcontractor who did. I had signed off on the load-bearing calculations for this very wall 3 years ago. The irony was bitter. My family was inside drinking $20 glasses of wine, celebrating Gavin's brilliance, while standing inside a building that functioned because of my brain. They mocked the dirt on my clothes, unaware that the clean water they were sipping was protected by the very systems I built. I moved away from the wall and drifted toward the display tables set up outside the ballroom doors. This was the shrine to Gavin's merger. There were glossy easels holding large printed boards, showcasing the logos of his firm and the company he was acquiring. I leaned in, my engineer's eyes scanning the text. It was a masterpiece of corporate nothingness. Synergistic alignment of asset classes, forward-facing revenue optimization, paradigm-shifting growth potential. I looked for the numbers. When you work in infrastructure, you learn that adjectives can lie. But math cannot. If a pipe can hold 50 gallons, it holds 50 gallons. Calling it a high-capacity flow solution does not change the physics. Gavin's boards were all adjectives. There was no mention of the debt load. There was no breakdown of the quarterly earnings for the company he was buying. There was no projection of operating costs post-merger. It was all flash. It was a render of a building with no blueprints for the foundation. Impressive, isn't it? I didn't turn around. I knew the voice. Nolan Rusk moved up beside me, swirling the ice in his glass. "It is certainly colorful," I said, keeping my eyes on the board. Nolan chuckled, a sound that lacked any real warmth. "You always were literal, Briar. That is why you never quite fit in with this world. You look at a vision and ask for a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are what keep bridges from falling down. Nolan..." He took a sip of his drink, leaning against the table with an air of casual superiority. "I am thinking of putting some capital into this new entity. Gavin offered me a preferred buy-in rate. A solid 15% return guaranteed within the first 6 months. You cannot find that kind of yield in the bond market." I finally looked at him. 15% in 6 months? That is what he said. Only for family and close friends, of course. "That is an aggressive projection," I said neutrally. In my head, alarms were ringing. A guaranteed 15% return in a volatile market wasn't an investment strategy. It was the opening line of a Ponzi scheme, or a desperate loan shark repayment plan. Nolan waved a hand dismissively. "Well, that is high finance, Briar. High risk, high reward. Not that I expect you to have much liquidity to play with. But hey, good on you for showing up tonight. It takes guts to come here looking like that." He gestured vaguely at my work pants. "I admit, I was surprised you didn't run out crying after that speech. You have grown a thicker skin." "I have been working with concrete. Nolan, you learn to harden up." He stared at me, his brow furrowing slightly. He was waiting for the shame. He wanted to see me embarrassed, to validate his choice of leaving me for a woman who wore stilettos and didn't talk about soil compaction. When I simply stared back with flat, bored eyes, he looked unsettled. "Right," Nolan said, pushing off the table. "Well, I need to find the bar. Good seeing you, Briar." He walked away, but he glanced back once, confused. I turned my attention to the far corner of the lobby. There were 2 armchairs set near a potted palm, away from the noise of the party. My father, Hank Callahan, was sitting in one of them. He was 71 years old, but tonight he looked 85. His tuxedo seemed a size too large, the collar gaping around his neck. He was staring at a fixed point on the carpet, his hands resting limply on his knees. My mother, Marla, stood beside his chair like a sentry, her posture rigid. I walked over. My heart did a slow, painful thud against my ribs. I had not seen Dad in 4 months. The last time I visited, he had been forgetful, repeating stories about his old fishing trips. But this was different. There was a vacancy in his eyes that terrified me. "Hello, Mom, Dad," I said softly. Marla snapped her head toward me. Her eyes raked over my outfit again, her lip curling. "Briar, I thought you left." "I wanted to say hello to Dad," I said, ignoring her tone. I crouched down so I was eye level with my father. "Hi, Dad, it is Briar." Hank blinked slowly. He turned his head toward me, but his eyes didn't quite focus. He looked through me, as if I were made of glass. "Briar?" he murmured. His voice was thin, like dry leaves scraping together. Did you finish the homework? The math one?" I froze. He was talking about me in high school, 15 years ago. "Dad, it is the party," I said gently, reaching out to touch his hand. His skin felt like paper, cold and fragile. "Gavin's party." "Gavin," he repeated. The name seemed to trigger a reflex. He sat up straighter, looking agitated. Gavin said, "The signature, I have to sign the papers. For the bank." "What papers, Dad?" I asked, my voice sharpening. Don't bother him, Marla cut in, stepping between us. She swatted my hand away from his. He is just tired. The lights are too bright. He doesn't need you interrogating him about nonsense. He is confused. Mom, I said, standing up to face her. He thinks I am in high school. And what is this about signing papers? It is business, Marla snapped. Things you wouldn't understand. Your father trusts Gavin to handle the estate. He is just overwhelmed by the crowd. Why don't you go? You have done enough damage to the family image for one night. I am his daughter. I am worried about him. If you were a good daughter, you would have worn a dress, she hissed. Before I could respond, a shadow fell over us. Everything okay here? Gavin was there. He had moved silently for a man who usually loved to make noise. He stood next to Marla, creating a wall. His face was flushed, a sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. She is upsetting your father, Marla said immediately. Gavin turned his smile on me. It was a terrifying expression. All teeth. No warmth. Briar? Really? Can't you just let us have one night? Dad is fine. He is just proud, overwhelmed by my success. He doesn't know where he is, Gavin, I said quietly. He is talking about signing papers. Gavin's left eye twitched. Routine estate planning. Mom and I are handling it. Look, I know you feel left out. It must be hard, seeing everyone achieving things while you are doing whatever it is you do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, tucking it into the breast pocket of my dirty work jacket. Tell you what, Gavin said, his voice dripping with faux generosity. My building maintenance team needs some contractors for the parking lot drainage. Small stuff, patchwork. Give them a call next week. Use my name. Maybe we can get you a contract so you can afford some decent clothes. He patted my cheek. It was a demeaning, patronizing tap. Now run along, he said. The adults are talking. He turned his back on me, focusing on Dad. Come on, Dad. Everett wants to meet you. Stand up. I watched as Gavin hauled my father to his feet. Hank stumbled, his legs weak, but Gavin gripped his arm tight, too tight, and steered him toward the ballroom like a prop. Marla followed, smoothing her dress, not looking back once. I stood alone in the lobby. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the business card Gavin had planted there. I crushed it in my hand. The engineer in me began to assemble the load path. Observation 1. Gavin was shaking on stage. Observation 2. The merger materials were devoid of financial data. Observation 3. Nolan was promised a return rate that screamed desperation. Observation 4. Dad was cognitively impaired. Observation 5. Mom was gatekeeping access to Dad to protect Gavin. Observation 6. Dad mentioned signing papers for the bank. I looked at the closed doors of the ballroom. They thought they had dismissed me. They thought I was just the dirty sister looking for a handout. But I wasn't looking for a handout. I was looking for the cracks. And I had just found a structural fracture so large that the whole building was already groaning under the weight. My brother wasn't just mean. He was dangerous. And he was using my father as his shield. I took out my phone. I didn't call a contractor for a parking lot job. I opened my secure folder and pulled up the number for the county clerk's records office. The party was just noise. The real work was about to happen in the silence. I needed air. The oxygen in the lobby felt recycled, filtered through too many layers of deceit and expensive perfume. I pushed through the heavy glass doors that led to the rooftop terrace. Stepping out into the cool Cleveland night, the wind up here was sharp, biting at my exposed skin and the thin fabric of my work jacket, but it felt clean. It felt real. The terrace was empty. The party guests were too busy clustering around the open bar downstairs to care about the view or the architecture. I walked to the edge, resting my hands on the limestone railing. Below me, the city was a grid of amber and white lights, a sprawling circuit board of energy. But I did not look down at the streets. I looked down at the surface beneath my boots. I knew this roof, not because I had been here before, but because I knew the language of it. It was a semi-intensive green roof system. I crouched down, brushing my fingers over the sedum plants and the drought-resistant grasses swaying in the wind. I checked the gravel ballast along the perimeter. It was river-wash stone, 3/4-inch grade, specifically chosen to prevent wind scour while allowing rapid percolation during a heavy storm. I traced the slope of the pavers with my eye, 1/4 of an inch drop per foot. Perfect. It was comforting. In a world where my brother lied about returns and my mother lied about family loyalty, gravity and hydraulics were honest. Water always flows downhill. If you build the channel right, the structure survives. If you cheat the math, you drown. It was a simple, binary truth that Gavin had never understood. "Most people come out here to smoke or to hide," a voice said from the shadows behind me. "You are the first person I have seen who came out here to inspect the drainage gradient." I straightened up, turning slowly. A man was standing near the doorway, half obscured by the dim architectural lighting. He stepped forward, the light catching the silver in his hair. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s, wearing a charcoal suit that was cut with a precision that made Gavin's tuxedo look like a costume rental. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just holding it, like a prop he had forgotten to put down. "I prefer the drainage to the company downstairs," I said, my voice guarded. "I can understand that," he said. He had a calm, measured way of speaking, like a man who never had to raise his voice to be heard. He walked over to the railing, standing a few feet away from me. He didn't look at me with the disdain I had seen in the ballroom. He looked at me with curiosity. "You are the one who designed the retention system for the West Side Municipal Library project 2 years ago," he said. It wasn't a question. I stiffened. "Excuse me?" "The West Side Library," he repeated, swirling his drink. "I read the technical case study in an infrastructure journal. It was a brilliant solution for a high-water table site. The use of permeable concrete combined with a subgrade cistern was elegant. I remember the diagrams, and I remember the name of the lead engineer on the credits." He turned to look at me fully. "You have a very specific signature in your work. You prioritize gravity flow over mechanical pumping. You like redundancy. Seeing you check the slope just now confirmed it." I stared at him. For the last 2 hours, I had been treated like a stain on the carpet. Now, a stranger on a roof was quoting my engineering portfolio. "Who are you?" I asked. "Miles Ketteridge," he said, extending a hand. I wiped the grit from the railing off my palm onto my pants before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, dry, and brief. "Briar Callahan," I said. "I know," Miles said. "I saw the little show your brother put on downstairs. He seems to think manual labor is a punchline. He does not realize that without people like you, his office tower would be a swimming pool." He turned back to the glass doors. From where we stood, we could see down into the atrium and the entrance to the ballroom. We could see Gavin moving through the crowd, his hand on the back of an investor, his head thrown back in laughter. "I used to work in risk assessment," Miles said quietly, his eyes fixed on my brother. "Mergers and acquisitions. My job was to go into companies that looked like gold mines and find the dynamite hidden in the basement." "And?" I asked, sensing the shift in the conversation. The air between us grew heavier. "And I have developed a nose for a specific kind of smoke," Miles said. "Your brother is not celebrating tonight. Briar, he is running." My pulse ticked up a notch. "Running from what?" "Insolvency," Miles said. The word hung in the cold air. "I still have friends in the regulatory agencies. The word on the street is that Gavin's firm has been over-leveraged for 18 months. He has been moving debt around like a shell game. This merger? It is not about growth. It is an exit strategy. He is trying to fold his toxic assets into the new company before the auditors realize the books are cooked." I looked through the glass at Gavin. He was toasting again. He looked radiant. He looked victorious. But now, with Miles's words in my ear, the image warped. I saw the desperation I had sensed earlier. The shaking hand. The sweat. "He is trying to jump off a sinking ship," Miles murmured. "But the problem with jumping is that you usually need a golden parachute, and if you don't have one, you steal one." He turned to me, his expression grave. The polite interest in my engineering was gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. Briar, let me ask you a question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. I nodded, my throat tight. Does your father manage his own finances? Miles asked. Or does he let Gavin handle the paperwork? The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The wind seemed to stop. The noise of the city dropped away. All I could hear was the sudden, rushing sound of my own blood in my ears. I thought of the phone call this morning. Gavin made a paper for me to sign. I thought of my father in the lobby 10 minutes ago. I have to sign the papers for the bank. I thought of my mother's aggressive defense. Let your brother handle it. It is for the best. My father, I started, but my voice failed. I cleared my throat and tried again. My father is slipping. His memory is going. My mother trusts Gavin implicitly. She says he takes care of the investments, so they do not have to worry. Miles closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, there was genuine pity in them. That is what I was afraid of. Why? I demanded, stepping closer. What do you know? I don't know anything for certain yet, Miles said, but I know the pattern. When a man like Gavin gets cornered, when he needs liquidity to cover a margin call or to dress up a balance sheet for a merger, he doesn't go to a bank. Banks ask questions. Banks check collateral. He goes to the people who trust him. He goes to the people who sign where he points without reading the fine print. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim business card. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, with nothing but a name and a number embossed in black ink. I am retired from the big firms, Miles said, handing me the card. I consult privately now, mostly for people who find themselves in the blast radius of a corporate collapse. I took the card. My fingers were trembling slightly. Do not go down there and scream at him, Miles warned, his voice low and intense. Do not make a scene. Gavin is operating on adrenaline and fear. If you confront him without leverage, he will destroy you. He will paint you as the jealous, unstable sister, and your parents will believe him because they need to believe him. They cannot afford to believe that their golden boy is a thief. He is my brother, I whispered. It was a weak protest, a reflex from a childhood that felt 1,000,000 years ago. Cain was a brother, too, Miles said dryly. Listen to me. Briar, you are an engineer. You understand load paths. You understand failure points. Treat this like a structural audit. Do not guess. Find the cracks. Find the documentation. Follow the money. He finished his drink in one swallow and set the glass down on the limestone railing with a soft clink. If I am wrong, Miles said, then you have lost nothing but a little faith in your family. And frankly, it looks like that account is already overdrawn. But if I am right... He looked through the glass one last time, at my father, who was now being led to a table by my mother, moving with the shuffling gait of a man who no longer knew where he was going. If I am right, Miles continued, and you do nothing, your father will die destitute. Gavin will burn through everything they have to keep his own lights on for one more month. He buttoned his jacket. It was a pleasure meeting you. Briar, I meant what I said about the library project. It was excellent work. Try to apply that same rigor to your own house before it collapses. He turned and walked back toward the door, moving seamlessly into the shadows, leaving me alone on the roof. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the card in my hand, Miles Kettridge. Then I looked through the window. I saw Gavin laughing. I saw him lean down and say something to my father. I saw my father nod, a slow, confused motion, and reach into his pocket to pat his chest, as if checking for something. A sick, cold feeling washed over me. It wasn't the wind. It was the realization that while I had been out here admiring the drainage, the flood had already started. Gavin wasn't just building a reputation. He was cannibalizing us. He was taking the safety and security of the people who loved him and feeding it into the furnace of his own ego. I gripped the cold stone of the railing. My knuckles turned white. I had come here tonight thinking I would just survive the humiliation. I thought the worst thing that could happen was a few insults about my boots. I was wrong. The insults were a distraction. The humiliation was a smokescreen. I put Miles's card into my secure pocket, right next to my phone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the biting night air. I wasn't going back downstairs to eat cake. I was going back downstairs to start an excavation. If Gavin wanted to play games with hidden assets and buried debts, he was about to learn a very hard lesson. He was playing against a woman who dug holes for a living, and I knew exactly how to dig a grave. I woke up at 6 in the morning with the taste of stale champagne still phantom clinging to the back of my throat, even though I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol the night before. The sun was just starting to bleed gray light through the blinds of my home office, illuminating the stack of blueprints on my desk. Usually, I would be halfway to a site inspection by now, checking soil density or arguing with a foreman about rebar spacing. Today, I had a different kind of excavation to do. I sat with my phone in my hand for 20 minutes, staring at the contact named Dad. My thumb hovered over the screen. Calling my parents at this hour used to be normal. My father was an early riser, a creature of habit who liked to read the paper with his coffee before the world got loud. But after last night, after the way he had looked through me like I was a stranger, the phone felt heavy, like a lead weight. I finally pressed the call button. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up, terrified that my mother would answer and shut me down, when the line clicked open. Hello? It was Dad. His voice sounded thin, scratchy, stripped of the booming confidence he used to have when I was a kid. Hi, Dad. It is Briar, I said, keeping my tone light, forcing a casualness I did not feel. I just wanted to check in. It was a late night. How are you feeling this morning? Briar? He paused, the silence stretching out just long enough to be uncomfortable. Oh, Briar. Yes. Hello? I am fine. Just having my toast. Your mother is out in the garden. She is deadheading the roses. My shoulders dropped an inch. Mom was outside. I had a window. That is good, I said. The party was quite something, wasn't it? Gavin really put on a show. Yes, Dad said, but the word lacked conviction. It sounded rehearsed. Gavin is doing very well, a big merger. I took a breath, gripping the edge of my desk. Dad, I was thinking about what you said in the lobby, about the papers. You mentioned you had to sign some things for the bank? The bank? He sounded confused again, that same foggy drift I had heard last night. I think so. Gavin brought them over. He said it was for the optimization, or was it the consolidation? He uses these big words. I can't always keep up. Did you read them, Dad? Well, no, he chuckled, a nervous, dry sound. The print is so small these days. Briar. And you know how it is. Pages and pages of legalese. Gavin said not to worry about the details. He said he set up what did he call it? A power of attorney, to make it easier, so he can handle the transfers without dragging me down to the branch every time. The air in my office seemed to drop 10 degrees. Power of attorney. In the right hands, it is a tool of care. In the wrong hands, it is a license to steal. Dad, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Which bank was this? Was it First National or the credit union? He hesitated. I could hear the clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug. I don't recall exactly. It might have been the one with the blue ship logo. Or, no, maybe it was the new one Gavin likes, the private one. I really don't know. Honey, your mother says it is safe. She says Gavin is the expert. Okay, I said, my voice tight. Okay, Dad. I just wanted to make sure everything was handled. You know how banks can be. Yes, Gavin is a good boy, he murmured, reciting the family mantra. He takes care of us. I said goodbye and hung up. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, crystalline rage. Gavin didn't just have access. He had the keys to the castle, and he had convinced the king to hand them over voluntarily. I didn't waste time crying. Tears don't fix structural failures. Action does. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Tessa Vaughn. She was my corporate attorney, the woman who helped me incorporate Hearthline Works and who ruthlessly negotiated my contracts with the city. She was expensive, sharp as a razor, and entirely immune to bullshit. "Briar?" she answered on the second ring. "It is 7:30 in the morning. Unless a retaining wall just collapsed on a city councilman, you owe me a very good coffee." "Gavin has power of attorney over my father," I said bluntly, "and my father is showing signs of cognitive decline." There was a beat of silence on the other end. The joking tone vanished instantly. "Define cognitive decline," Tessa said, her voice shifting into professional gear. "Memory loss, confusion. He didn't recognize me at first last night. He didn't know what bank he was dealing with this morning. He signed papers he didn't read because Gavin told him to." "And you think Gavin is moving assets?" "I think Gavin is insolvent and using my parents as a piggy bank to cover his losses before a merger," I said. "A source told me last night that Gavin is in deep trouble." "Briar," Tessa said, her voice dropping lower. "If Gavin is using a power of attorney to transfer assets from a cognitively impaired person for his own benefit, that is not just a civil dispute. That is elder financial exploitation. In this state, that is a felony. It carries prison time." "I know," I said. "I need to prove it. I need to know where the money is going." "I can't subpoena bank records without a lawsuit or a police report," Tessa warned. "And if you file either of those now, Gavin will claim you are a vindictive sister trying to sabotage his big deal. He will parade your parents out to say they consented to everything. We need hard evidence before we pull the trigger." "I will get the evidence," I said. "Call Cal," she advised. "Cal Huxley. He does forensic accounting and asset tracing. I will text you his number. And Briar, be careful. If Gavin is desperate enough to steal from his parents, he is desperate enough to destroy anyone who lights a match in the dark." I hung up and called Cal Huxley immediately. I gave him the rundown. Names, dates, the companies involved in the merger. I told him to look for offshore accounts, shell companies, anything that looked like a place to hide money. He didn't ask questions. He just quoted me a retainer fee that made my eyes water and told me he would start digging. But I couldn't just sit and wait for Cal. I needed to see the damage myself. I sat down at my computer and logged into the county recorder's public database. It was a clunky, outdated website that looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 90s, but it held the truth about every square inch of land in the county. I typed in Callahan, Hank and Callahan, Marla. The search wheel spun for an agonizing 10 seconds. Then a list populated. Most of it was old history. The original deed from 30 years ago when they bought the house. A release of mortgage from 10 years ago when they finally paid it off. They had been debt-free. That was their pride. Dad used to brag about it at Thanksgiving. We own the roof over our heads. Free and clear. My eyes scanned down to the most recent entry. It was dated 3 months ago. Mortgage deed, grantor. Hank Callahan, Marla Callahan. Grantee, Apex Capital Lending Group. I clicked on the document image. The PDF loaded slowly, line by line. When the numbers resolved on the screen, I stopped breathing. Principal amount, $450,000. I stared at the screen. My parents' house was worth maybe $600,000 in the current market. This wasn't a small loan for repairs. This was a massive cash-out refinance. They had stripped nearly 80% of the equity out of their home in a single signature. I scrolled down to the signature page. There was my father's signature, Hank Callahan, but the loop of the H was shaky. The line trailed off at the end. It looked like the hand of a man who was being guided, or a man who was terrified. And right below it, looking bold and practiced, was my mother's signature. And there, listed as the witness and the notary, was a name I recognized. Joyce Miller. She was Gavin's personal assistant. I printed the document, the printer word, spitting out the pages that proved my parents were no longer the owners of their own safety. They were tenants in a house owned by a predatory lender, carrying a debt they had no income to service. I reached for a fresh legal pad. I grabbed a red pen. I started to draw a timeline. It is what I did when a project went off the rails. You map the failure. July 15th. Gavin's company misses a quarterly earning projection, according to the rumors Miles mentioned. August 1st. Dad mentions signing papers to a neighbor. I remembered a vague comment from an aunt. August 20th. The mortgage is recorded. $450,000 extracted. September 1st. Gavin announces the merger talks. Yesterday. Gavin begs me for $60,000. The math was brutal. Gavin had burned through nearly $500,000 of my parents' money in 90 days. Where did it go? Covering payroll? Paying off a blackmailer? Padding the accounts to make his company look solvent for the merger? It didn't matter where it went. What mattered was that it was gone. And if this deal fell through, or if Gavin crashed, the bank would come for the house. My father, with his failing memory, and my mother, with her blind loyalty, would be on the street. I looked at the red ink on the page. It looked like a wound. For years, I had let them treat me like the disappointment. I let them mock my boots and my truck and my dirt-stained hands. I stayed silent because I thought it was the price of keeping the peace. But there was no peace here. There was only a slow, quiet robbery in progress. I pinned the mortgage document to the wall above my desk. I looked at Gavin's name on the witness line. "You picked the wrong sister to mess with," I said to the empty room. I wasn't just an engineer anymore. I was the demolition crew, and I was going to take apart Gavin's life brick by brick until I found every single cent he had stolen. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Miles Ketteridge. "You were right. The house is leveraged. I am going to need that forensic audit you mentioned. Tell me where to start." The party was over. The war had officially begun. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs usually took 40 minutes, but today it felt like I was crossing a timeline between two different realities. On the outside, the neighborhood was a picture of American stability. The lawns were manicured into submission. The mailboxes were painted a uniform matte black, and the SUVs parked in the driveways were polished to a shine. It was the world I had grown up in, a world that prioritized how things looked over how things actually functioned. I pulled my truck into the driveway, parking behind my father's sedan. The car hadn't moved in weeks. I could tell by the layer of pollen settling on the windshield and the way a small pile of leaves had gathered against the rear tires. I took a deep breath, patted the folder in my bag where I had stashed the printout of the mortgage deed, and stepped out. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the daughter stopping by for coffee, not the auditor coming for a raid. When I unlocked the front door, I still had my key, a fact that seemed to annoy my mother. The smell hit me first. It wasn't a bad smell, but it was stale. It smelled of lemon pledge, old carpet, and silence. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. "In the den." My mother's voice floated back. It was sharp, clipped. She was already on edge. I walked into the den. My father, Hank, was sitting in his leather recliner. The television was on, blaring a rerun of a game show at a volume that made my teeth ache. He was staring at the screen, but his eyes were glazed, tracking the motion without really processing the content. "Hi, Dad," I said, stepping into his line of sight. He blinked, turning his head slowly. "Oh, hello." He looked at the window. "Is the mail here? I was waiting for the Tuesday circulars." "It is Saturday, Dad," I said gently, sitting on the ottoman near his feet. "Saturday?" He frowned, looking genuinely distressed. "No, that can't be right. I have an appointment on. I have to go to the—" He trailed off, his hand fluttering in the air like a wounded bird. He looked past me, his eyes seeking out my mother, who was standing by the bookshelf, aggressively dusting a row of encyclopedias that hadn't been opened since 1998. "Marla, is it Saturday?" "It is Saturday. Hank," my mother said, not looking up. "Briar just likes to confuse you." "I am not trying to confuse him, Mom. I am telling him the day of the week." Marla turned then, the dust rag clenched in her hand like a weapon. "Why are you here, Briar? I thought you would be busy. Don't you have some ditch to dig?" I wanted to see Dad, I said, keeping my voice level. I was worried about him after the party. He is fine, Marla snapped. He is just tired. It was a late night. Gavin's party was magnificent, wasn't it? Everyone was there, everyone who matters. She emphasized the last sentence, looking pointedly at my work boots. Dad, I said, ignoring her. Have you eaten today? Hank looked at his lap. I think so. Did we have lunch, Marla? You had a sandwich at noon, Marla answered for him. Stop pestering him, Briar. You are making him anxious. She checked her watch, a nervous, jerky movement. I need to make tea. Gavin might stop by later. He is a good son. He checks on us. I will help you. I started to rise, but she waved me down. No, sit. Don't touch anything in my kitchen. You probably have grease on your hands. She turned and marched out of the room. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway, followed by the clatter of a kettle being filled. I had maybe 5 minutes. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded paper. It was the printout of the mortgage deed, the document that proved they had signed away $450,000 of equity. I leaned in close to my father. He was picking at a loose thread on the arm of his chair, lost in his own world. Dad, I whispered. Dad, look at me. He looked up, his blue eyes watery and clouded. Briar, when did you get here? Just now. Dad, listen to me. I need to ask you something important. I unfolded the paper and held it out, pointing to the signature at the bottom. Do you remember signing this? He squinted at the paper. What is it? It is a mortgage deed. Dad, for this house, it says you borrowed $450,000 3 months ago. Hank recoiled slightly, pushing the paper away. No, that is wrong. We paid the house off. Years ago, we had a party. We burned the note in the fireplace. You remember? I remember. Dad, that is why I am asking. Why is there a new loan? He rubbed his forehead, his face twisting in confusion. Gavin said we needed to optimize, that is the word, optimize the assets. He said money sitting in the walls is dead money. He said he could make it grow. So you gave him the money? I signed the paper, Hank said, his voice trembling. I didn't want to. It was so many pages. But Marla, your mother said we had to help. She said Gavin needed the liquidity for the big thing, the merger. Did Gavin tell you he was going to pay it back? Of course, Hank said, looking offended that I would even ask. He is my son. He said it was just a bridge loan, but... He looked around the room, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He hasn't paid the monthly. I got a letter. From the bank. I hid it. I didn't want your mother to see. My stomach dropped through the floor. They were already missing payments. Where is the letter, Dad? In the drawer. He pointed to the side table. Under the TV guide. I opened the drawer. Buried under a stack of crossword puzzles was a harsh red envelope from Apex Capital Lending Group. Notice of default. They were 60 days past due. I looked at the signature on the mortgage deed again. I held it up next to the old birthday card he had written me 5 years ago, which I kept in my wallet. The signature on the card was bold, sweeping, confident. The signature on the deed was shaky, the lines jagged, trailing off at the end as if the hand holding the pen had been too weak to finish. He made you sign this when you were confused, didn't he? I asked softly. He held the pen, Dad whispered. A tear leaked out of the corner of his eye and tracked through the wrinkles on his cheek. He put the pen in my hand, and he put his hand over mine. He said, "Just do it, Dad. Don't be difficult. Do you want me to fail?" I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. Gavin hadn't just tricked them. He had physically coerced a man with dementia into signing away his life. "What are you doing?" The voice came from the doorway. It wasn't my mother. It was Gavin. He stood there in a cashmere sweater and designer jeans, looking like the picture of casual weekend success, but his eyes were tight, alerting me to the tension underneath. He had walked in through the garage door, silent as a snake. I didn't hide the paper. I stood up, holding the default notice in one hand and the deed in the other. I am looking at the reason why Dad is crying. Gavin. Gavin walked into the room, bringing a wave of expensive cologne with him. He snatched the papers from my hand before I could react. He glanced at them, his face impassive, and then tossed them onto the coffee table with a scoff. You are snooping, Briar. Typical. Can't find success of your own, so you go digging through our parents' private business. Private business? I stepped closer to him. I was wearing my work boots, which added an inch to my height, putting me almost eye level with him. You took out a $450,000 mortgage on a paid-off house, and now it is in default. Dad says you guided his hand to sign it. Dad is confused, Gavin said smoothly. He looked over at our father, his expression shifting instantly to one of pitying affection. Dad, you are getting worked up again. Briar is upsetting you, isn't she? She doesn't understand high-level finance. Hank looked between us, terrified. I don't know. The letter said. The letter is a clerical error, Dad, Gavin said, his voice soothing but commanding. I told you I handled it. Why did you keep it? Why didn't you give it to me? I forgot, Hank whispered. See? Gavin turned to me, spreading his hands. He forgets. He doesn't know what is happening. That is why I have the power of attorney, to protect him from things he can't understand, and to protect him from predators. You are the predator, Gavin, I spat. Where is the money? $450,000. Where is it? Gavin's smile vanished. He took a step into my personal space. His voice dropped to a hiss, too low for Dad to hear over the game show. You need to back off. Briar, you are out of your depth. This is leverage for the merger. It is temporary. Once the deal closes next week, everything gets paid off with interest. If you go running your mouth and spook the lenders or Mom, you will ruin everything. And if the deal falls apart, then the house really is gone. Do you want that on your conscience? You are gambling with their home. I am investing, he corrected. Something you wouldn't know about. Now get out. You are stressing him out. Look at him. I looked at Dad. He was shaking, his hands gripping the arms of the chair, tears streaming down his face silently. He looked small and broken. Marla came back into the room with the tea tray. She stopped when she saw us. Oh, Gavin, you are here, she beamed, her face lighting up in a way it never did for me. Then she saw the tension. What is happening? Briar, are you causing trouble again? Briar was just leaving, Gavin said firmly. She has work to do, somewhere dirty, I assume. He looked at me. There was a challenge in his eyes. He wasn't afraid that I would yell. He wasn't afraid of a fight. He was afraid that I would stay and keep asking questions that had factual answers. He was afraid of the math. I looked at my mother, who was already pouring tea for Gavin, completely ignoring the distress on her husband's face. She had made her choice. She chose the lie because the lie was comfortable. The truth was too expensive. I am leaving, I said. I bent down and kissed my father on the forehead. I love you, Dad. I am going to fix this. Goodbye, Briar, Marla said coldly. I walked out of the house. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort it took not to smash Gavin's face into the drywall. I got into my truck and drove 3 blocks away, pulling into the empty parking lot of a community park. I turned off the engine and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My phone rang. It was Cal Huxley. I answered on the first ring. Tell me you found something. I found a carousel, Cal's voice crackled through the speaker. I traced the funds from the mortgage disbursement. It didn't go into an investment account. It went into a shell LLC registered in Delaware under a generic name. From there, it was split into 4 smaller transfers. Where did they go? One went to a luxury car dealership, Cal said. One went to pay off a massive credit card bill under Celeste's name. And the other 2? They went right back into Gavin's corporate account to cover payroll. He is paying his employees with your parents' home equity, Briar, He is completely liquidating them just to keep the lights on at his office for another month. He said it was for the merger, I said, my voice dead calm. There is no merger, Cal said. I dug deeper into the filing for the acquisition. It is stalled. The other company walked away from the table 3 days ago during due diligence. They found the debt. Gavin knows the deal is dead. He is just keeping up the charade to loot whatever he can before the bankruptcy filing hits. I closed my eyes. It was worse than Miles had said. It wasn't a risky maneuver. It was a scavenge operation. Gavin was picking the bones of our family clean before he fled. Cal, I said, send me everything, every bank statement, every transfer record, every timestamp. I want it all in a certified file. You going to the police? Cal asked. Not yet, I said. I looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes were hard, dry, and cold. The police take months. Banks take years. I don't have that kind of time. My father is 60 days away from foreclosure. So what are you going to do? I am an engineer, Cal, I said. When a building is structurally unsound and dangerous, you don't wait for it to fall on people. You trigger a controlled demolition. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the engine as it cooled. Gavin thought he had won because he had kicked me out of the house. He thought he had silenced me. He didn't understand that he had just given me the final variable for my equation. He was using power. He was using shame. He was using affection. Fine, I would use those things too. I started the truck. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that felt like a promise. I wasn't the sad sister anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the person who knew exactly where the explosives needed to be placed to bring the whole rotten structure down. And I was going to make sure that when it fell, Gavin was the only one standing in the collapse zone. The file from Cal Huxley arrived in my encrypted inbox at 3 a.m. It was not just a spreadsheet. It was an autopsy of my parents' financial dignity. I sat in my home office with only the desk lamp on, scrolling through the rows of data. Cal had flagged the transfers in bright red. It was a slow, methodical bleed. It started 8 months ago. Small amounts that could pass as errands or reimbursements. $300 for office supplies, $500 for consulting. Then, as Gavin's company began to suffocate under the weight of its own debt, the numbers grew bolder. $7,000 for a short-term liquidity loan, $12,000 wired directly to a luxury leasing agency for Gavin's Porsche, and then the big one, the mortgage payout. It had been drained from the shell account in chunks of $50,000, transferred weekly into Gavin's payroll account to keep his staff from walking out. He was literally feeding his ego with the equity of the house my father had worked 40 years to pay off. I picked up the phone and called Tessa Vaughn. It was barely dawn, but I knew she would be awake. I have the ledger, I said. I have the flow of funds. It links the power of attorney directly to his personal expenses. Good, Tessa said, her voice crisp. Now stop acting like a sister and start acting like a prosecutor. I need you to create a chain of custody. Do not just print these out. Download the metadata. Timestamp every file. If we go to a judge, Gavin's lawyers will claim these are fabricated or out of context. We need to prove that these files came directly from the bank servers to your investigator and then to you, without alteration. I spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that. I logged every file name, every hash sum, and every IP address. I built a binder that was 3 inches thick. It was heavy, cold, and undeniable. But a binder does not arrest a man. For that, I needed a badge. I reached out to a contact from my past life in municipal contracting. 3 years ago, I had designed a stormwater retention system for a federal building, and during the security clearance process, I had met a man named Rowan Hale. He worked for a specialized task force that investigated financial crimes involving government contracts and interstate wire fraud. I sent him a secure message. I have a structural failure imminent. It involves wire fraud and elder abuse. I have the blueprints. He called me 10 minutes later. Briar Callahan, Rowan said. His voice was gravelly, familiar. I have not heard from you since we poured that foundation in Sector 4. What do you have? My brother is Gavin Callahan. He is running a Ponzi scheme disguised as a merger, and he is using my father's identity to launder the debt. There was a long silence on the line. We know who Gavin is, Rowan said quietly. My grip on the phone tightened. You are watching him? We have had a file open on his firm for 6 months, Rowan admitted. We suspected he was inflating assets to secure loans, but we could not prove where the cash inflow was coming from. We thought he had a silent partner. We did not realize the partner was his parents. I have the proof, I said. I have the mortgage deed signed under duress. I have the transfers. I have the default notice. That changes things, Rowan said. That gives us probable cause for an immediate freeze. But Breyer, we need to do this right. If we move too early, he shreds the physical documents. If we spook him, he runs. He has a passport and, according to our surveillance, he has been looking at property in countries with non-extradition treaties. He is not going anywhere, I said, my mind racing. He is too arrogant. He thinks he is about to close the deal of the century. We need a controlled environment, Rowan instructed. We need him in a room where he feels safe, where he is distracted, and where we can secure both him and his electronic devices before he can wipe them. We cannot do a raid at his office. Too many exits, too many shredders. He is hosting a dinner, I said. The idea formed instantly, sharp and perfect. He wants to show off his new partners. He wants to prove to the world that the merger is real. He is planning a celebration dinner at the Ridge and Harbor restaurant. When? Friday night, 7 o'clock. That works, Rowan said. But you need to make sure he actually shows up, and you need to make sure he feels comfortable enough to bring his laptop or tablet. We need his digital keys. Leave that to me, I said. Breyer, Rowan added, his tone warning. This has to be clean. No screaming matches, no family drama. If you tip him off, he vanishes, and your father's money vanishes with him. Understood. I hung up. Now came the hardest part of the entire excavation. I had to put on a mask. I sat at my desk and stared at my phone for 5 minutes. Rehearsing the lines in my head, I had to swallow every ounce of pride I possessed. I had to taste the bile and smile through it. I dialed Gavin's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice impatient. What is it, Breyer? I am in a meeting. I am sorry to disturb you, Gavin, I said, pitching my voice to sound small, tired, and defeated. I wanted to apologize. Silence. I could hear him breathing. He was waiting for the catch. Apologize for what? He asked suspiciously. For the scene at Mom and Dad's house, I lied. I went home and looked at my own finances, and I realized I was just projecting. I was jealous. Gavin, you were right. I have been working in the mud for so long that I forgot how big business works. I overreacted about the mortgage. Dad explained it to me again. It is just leverage, right? Exactly, Gavin exhaled, the tension leaving his voice. It is just leverage, Breyer. Standard operating procedure. I told you that. I know. I was stupid, I continued, twisting the knife into my own ego. I don't want to be the outsider anymore. Gavin, I want to support you. I want to be there when you win. Well, Gavin said, his tone shifting to smug satisfaction. It takes a big person to admit they are small. Breyer, I appreciate that. You know I only want what is best for the family. I know, I said. Are we still on for the dinner with the partners? I would love to come. I promise I will dress appropriately this time. I want to see you close this deal. The dinner is Friday, Gavin said magnanimously. Yes, come. It will be good for the optics to have a united front. Everett and Marlene were asking about you. They were impressed by your intensity. I will be on my best behavior, I promised. Good. See you there. He hung up. I dropped the phone on the desk and walked directly to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. I felt dirty. It was a different kind of dirt than the job site. This dirt didn't wash off. But I wasn't done. The illusion had to be perfect. I went online and ordered a gift for Celeste, A vintage bottle of Bordeaux, costing $300. I included a note, to celebrate your elegance and patience. Looking forward to the future. I sent flowers to my mother, white lilies, her favorite. The card read, I am sorry I upset you. You were right to trust Gavin. Love, Briar. By Wednesday, the atmosphere had shifted. My mother called me, her voice tearful and relieved. I knew you would come around, she sobbed. Gavin showed me the flowers. We are just so happy you are stopping this nonsense. We are a family. Briar, we stick together. Yes, Mom, I said, staring at the timeline pinned to my wall. We stick together. While they were celebrating my submission, I was finalizing their survival. I met with a specialist in elder law, a colleague of Tessa's. We drafted a petition for emergency guardianship, citing financial exploitation and cognitive incapacity. We prepared a trust document, funded entirely by my savings and the retained earnings of Hearthline Works. I moved $200,000 of my own money into a secured escrow account. It was everything I had saved for my company's expansion next year. I was supposed to buy new excavators. I was supposed to hire 3 new crews. Instead, I was building a safety net for a father who couldn't remember my name and a mother who preferred my brother's lies. But I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it so that when I pulled the trigger, I wouldn't be leaving them to starve. I was buying the right to destroy Gavin without guilt. On Thursday night, 24 hours before the dinner, I sat in my living room with the lights off. My work boots were by the door, cleaned and polished. Beside them sat a pair of heels I hadn't worn in 4 years. I looked at the layout of the Ridge and Harbor restaurant on my tablet. I memorized the exits. I checked the seating chart Gavin had emailed out. He had placed me at the far end of the table, away from the action, quiet and contained. He thought I was coming to kneel. He had no idea that I had already poured the concrete around his feet. The evidence was certified. The federal agents were briefed. The trap was set. I closed my eyes and visualized the flow of water through a storm drain. It moves fast. It moves hard. And if you stand in the way, it takes you down. Tomorrow night, the floodgates would open, and Gavin Callahan was going to learn that you can only tread water for so long before the undertow pulls you under. It was 11:30 at night, the eve of the dinner that was supposed to cement my brother's legacy. The house was quiet, the kind of heavy, pressurized silence that precedes a storm. I was sitting at my kitchen island, nursing a cup of lukewarm herbal tea, staring at the screen of my phone as if it were a bomb detonator. When it finally buzzed, vibrating harsh and loud against the granite countertop, I didn't jump. I had been expecting it. Predatory animals are creatures of habit, and when they are cornered, they lash out, or they beg. The caller ID said Gavin. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to sit in his high-rise condo, surrounded by leased furniture and rented art, wondering if his sister, the one he called Filth, was going to leave him in the dark. On the 4th ring, I picked up. Hello? Briar. Gavin's voice came through the line. It was not the smooth baritone broadcast voice he used at parties. It was thin, reedy, and cracked at the edges. It sounded like he had been screaming into a pillow or drinking straight scotch for 3 hours. You are awake. Good. It is almost midnight, Gavin, I said, keeping my voice sleepy and pliable. Is everything okay? Is it Dad? Dad is fine. Everyone is fine, he snapped, then immediately dialed it back, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leaves crumbling. Sorry, long day. The prep for tomorrow is intense. You know how it is. Or, well, maybe you don't. Big deals have a lot of moving parts. I can imagine, I said. You must be excited. Excited. Yeah, listen, Briar. He paused, and I heard the unmistakable click of a lighter. He was smoking again. He had quit 5 years ago for his image, but clearly, the nicotine was the only thing holding his nerves together. I have a small, structural hiccup, nothing major, just a liquidity timing issue with the international transfers. What does that mean? I asked, playing the role of the uneducated laborer. It means the wires from the merger acquisition fund are stuck in clearing until Monday. He lied. He lied so easily, it was a reflex. But I have a vendor payment for the venue and a few consulting fees that need to hit the account by tomorrow morning to keep the schedule green. It is a cash flow gap. 48 hours, max. He took a deep drag of the cigarette. I could hear the intake of breath. I need you to spot me, he said. $60,000. I sat up straighter. 60,000. It was a specific number. It wasn't a round 50 or a hopeful 100. $60,000 was a payroll cycle, or a hush money payment, or the exact amount needed to stop a lien from being filed on his office equipment. Gavin, I said, infusing my voice with shock. $60,000? That is a lot of money. Is it? He laughed again, bitter and sharp. Come on, Briar. I know you are sitting on cash. I know that dirty little company of yours pulls in decent margins. You live like a nun, so you must have savings. Digging ditches pays better than people think, right? Even if you do come home smelling like fertilizer. There it was. Even when he was begging, he had to spit on me. He had to remind himself that he was the prince and I was the peasant, even as he asked for the peasant's coin. I have savings, I admitted slowly. But that is for my equipment upgrades next quarter. I can't just move that much cash without a plan. The plan is I pay you back on Tuesday with 10% interest, Gavin interrupted, his voice rising in pitch. 10%. Briar. That is $6,000 for 3 days of lending. You cannot get that return digging holes. Just wire it. I will text you the routing number. I don't know, Gavin. I hesitated. Banks are slow on Fridays. If I trigger a transfer that big, they might flag it. Call them, he shouted. The mask slipped completely. For a second, I heard the sheer, unadulterated panic underneath. Yell at them. Make it happen. I need that liquidity. Briar. If I don't show cleared funds by noon, the vendors get antsy. It looks bad for the merger. Do you want to ruin this for the family over a paperwork delay? No, I don't want to ruin anything, I said softly. Then do it. Be a good sister for once. Stop hoarding your pennies and help the people who are actually changing the world. I closed my eyes, visualizing the timeline Cal had sent me. He had burned through $450,000 of my parents' money in 90 days. He had drained his corporate accounts, and now he was scraping the bottom of the barrel, trying to bully me into funding his delusion for just one more weekend. I can't do it over the phone. Gavin, I said. The silence on the other end was heavy. What? I said I can't do it tonight. My bank security key is at the office. I lied. But bring the wire instructions to the dinner tomorrow. We can talk about it before the appetizers. If everything looks right, I will write you a personal check. It will clear instantly. A check? He sounded repulsed, as if paper money was beneath him. But then, he did the math. A check in hand was better than a rejection. Fine, bring the checkbook, but do not make a scene about it. Slip it to me quietly. I don't want Everett thinking I am borrowing from family. I will be very discreet, I promised. Good, don't be late. He hung up without a goodbye. I lowered the phone and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He was terrified. The request for $60,000 wasn't for vendors. You don't pay a venue the day of the event. That is paid weeks in advance. No, this was something else. This was a margin call. Or maybe he needed to show a specific balance in his account to prevent an automated audit trigger. He was walking a tightrope over a canyon of fraud, and the wind was picking up. I opened my secure messaging app. I typed a message to Rowan Hale. Subject contacted me at 11:45, requested immediate unsecured loan of $60,000. He is out of liquidity. Panic levels are critical. He is erratic. If he does not get money by Monday, he knows he is finished. Flight risk has escalated to severe. We must be precise tomorrow. Rowan's reply came back 30 seconds later, a single green bubble. Copy that. Teams are briefed. Perimeter will be established at the restaurant by 1800 hours. Do not give him the money. Keep him hopeful until dessert. I switched to my thread with Cal Huxley. Run a check on Gavin's personal assets again. Look for fire sales. He needs 60 grand fast. See if he listed his car or his watch or anything liquid in the last 24 hours. Cal was awake too. His message came back with a screenshot. He listed the Porsche on a wholesale dealer network this afternoon. Cash offer only, undervalued by 30% for speed. He is packing his bags. Briar. He is cashing out whatever isn't nailed down. I stared at the image of the sleek black car my brother loved more than he loved his wife. Selling it was an admission of death. My phone buzzed again, a text message. It wasn't Gavin, it was Nolan Rusk. Hey, Briar. Just thinking about you. I know things have been tense, but I hope you're smart enough to see the opportunity tomorrow. Gavin is going to the moon with this deal. I am putting in serious capital. If you want, I can bundle your money with mine. Get you a better rate. You deserve a win. Babe, let me help you up. I stared at the screen, my lip curling in disgust. Nolan. Babe. He thought I was the same girl he had dumped because I wasn't climbing the social ladder fast enough. He thought I was staring at Gavin's success with envy, desperate for a crumb. He had no idea that he was offering to bundle his money onto a sinking ship. If I were a better person, I would warn him. I would tell him to run. But Nolan had stood there at the party and laughed while Gavin mocked me. He had looked at my boots and sneered. He was part of the ecosystem that allowed men like Gavin to thrive, the sycophants who enabled the narcissists because they hoped some of the shine would rub off. I typed a reply. Thanks, Nolan. That is really sweet of you. I am bringing my checkbook tomorrow. Let's see how the night goes. I just want everyone to get what they deserve. It was the most honest thing I had said all week. I wanted everyone to get exactly what they deserved. Nolan. Awesome. You won't regret it. Wear something nice. I put the phone down on the counter, face down. The pieces were locked in place. Gavin was insolvent. He was selling his toys. He was stealing from his parents. And now, he was trying to bleed me dry as a final act of dominance before he ran. He didn't want the $60,000 to save the company. The company was already dead. He wanted the $60,000 so he could disappear comfortably. He wanted my sweat equity to pay for his plane ticket and his first month of rent in a country without an extradition treaty. He was willing to leave Mom and Dad with a foreclosed home and a bankrupt estate, as long as he got away clean. I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark street. You are not going anywhere, brother, I whispered to the glass. I turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be attending a dinner, I would be officiating a funeral. The funeral of Gavin Callahan's reputation. And the only thing I was bringing to the wake was a binder full of receipts. The Ridge and Harbor restaurant sat on a limestone bluff overlooking the lake, a glass and steel monolith that screamed exclusivity. It was the kind of place where the valet parkers drove cars better than what most people owned, and the menu didn't list prices, because if you had to ask, you were in the wrong zip code. Gavin had chosen this location for a specific reason. He wanted to make me feel small. He wanted me to walk through those towering glass doors, see the 30-foot ceilings and the waiters in white gloves, and feel like the dirt from my job site was still clinging to my skin. He wanted me to be intimidated by the architecture of wealth. What Gavin did not know was that 4 years ago, I was the one who signed off on the geological stability report for this very bluff. As I walked toward the entrance, I didn't look at the chandeliers. I looked at the retaining wall to my left. I ran my hand along the textured concrete, noting the weep holes I had insisted they install to prevent hydrostatic pressure buildup. I knew the soil composition under the foundation was silty clay. I knew exactly how deep the pilings went. This place wasn't a palace to me. It was just another structure that relied on physics to keep from sliding into the water. And just like my brother's career, it only looked solid from the surface. I checked my reflection in the glass door before entering. I had left the work boots at home. I wasn't wearing a gown, either. I had chosen a tailored charcoal trouser suit made of Italian wool, paired with a simple silk blouse, no jewelry except for a vintage watch. It was the kind of outfit that whispered competence rather than screaming for attention. It was the uniform of someone who signs the checks, not someone who begs for them. When I stepped into the private dining room Gavin had reserved, the conversation stopped. My mother, Marla, was the first to react. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay, wearing a sequined dress that was perhaps a bit too loud for the season. She blinked at me, her mouth opening slightly. She had prepared herself to be embarrassed by her blue-collar daughter. She wasn't prepared for this. "Briar?" she said, her voice uncertain. "Hello, Mother," I said calmly. I walked over and kissed her cheek. "You look lovely. The lilies arrived?" "Yes," she stammered. "Yes, they did. Thank you." Gavin was standing by the window, a drink in his hand. He looked tired. The circles under his eyes were covered with concealer, but the lighting was unforgiving. When he saw me, relief washed over his face, followed immediately by confusion. He had expected me to look desperate, clutching a checkbook. Instead, I looked like I was here to conduct a board meeting. "You cleaned up," Gavin said, forcing a smile. "I can scrub pretty hard when I need to," I replied. He gestured to the two people sitting at the round table. "Briar, I want you to meet the partners. This is Everett Thorne and Marlene Vane." I turned to them. Everett was a man in his 60s with eyes like flint. Marlene was younger, sharp-featured, typing on a phone that she slid away as I approached. These were not soft investors. These were institutional sharks. I could see the tension in their shoulders. They weren't here to celebrate. They were here because they were suspicious, and Gavin was trying to wine and dine his way out of a corner. "A pleasure," Everett said, not standing up. He looked me up and down, assessing the suit. "Gavin said you were in construction." "Infrastructure engineering," I corrected, extending my hand. "Civil and hydraulic systems. Actually, I consulted on the drainage mitigation for this building. If the patio is dry tonight, that is my doing." Everett's eyebrows went up a fraction of an inch. He shook my hand. "Is that so?" "It is," I said. "You have to be careful with limestone bluffs, hidden fissures. If you don't map the cracks properly, the whole thing gives way when it rains." I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Everett paused. He heard the double meaning. "And," I continued, turning back to the door, "I hope you don't mind, Gavin, but I took the liberty of bringing a guest. I thought it would be valuable for you to have another perspective on the market." Gavin's face tightened. "A guest? Briar? This is a private family dinner with key partners. We didn't set a place for—" The door opened, and Miles Ketteridge walked in. The effect was instantaneous. Miles was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He moved with an effortless, predatory grace. He didn't look at Gavin. He looked directly at Everett. Everett stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Miles?" Everett said, his voice dropping an octave. "Miles Ketteridge?" "Hello, Everett," Miles said smoothly, walking over and shaking Everett's hand. "It has been a while, since the unrest in the futures market. I believe—" Marlene looked from Miles to Gavin, her eyes widening. "You know Miles?" she asked Gavin. Gavin looked like he had swallowed a stone. He was staring at Miles with a mixture of recognition and absolute terror. He knew the name. Everyone in high finance knew the name. Miles was the grim reaper of bad deals. If Miles Ketteridge showed up at your dinner, it usually meant an audit was 5 minutes behind him. We haven't been formally introduced," Gavin stammered. "Briar, how do you know Mr. Ketteridge?" "Oh, Miles is a fan of sustainable infrastructure," I said breezily, taking my seat. "We met on a roof. We were discussing load-bearing capacities. I mentioned I was coming to dinner to celebrate my brother's incredible success, and Miles said he would love to meet the man behind the numbers." I looked at Gavin. "I knew you wouldn't mind. You always say you want to network with the best." Gavin's laugh was a strangled sound. "Of course, any friend of Briar's. Please, sit. We can squeeze a chair in." The waiter hurried over, sensing the shift in power, and quickly set a place for Miles between Everett and my father. My father, Hank, smiled vaguely at Miles. "Are you at the bank?" Dad asked. Something like that, Miles said kindly. I work with numbers. Hank, like your son. Gavin is a genius with numbers, Marla piped up, sensing the tension and trying to smooth it over with the only tool she had, blind praise. He has always been the smart one. Briar was the one who liked to play in the mud. But Gavin? He was born for a suit. He takes care of everything for us. Is that right? Marlene asked, her voice cool. He manages your assets? Oh, completely, Marla beamed, taking a sip of wine. We don't have to worry about a thing. He handles the house, the retirement, all the paperwork. He says it is too complicated for us old folks. She laughed, patting Gavin's hand. Gavin pulled his hand away slightly, his skin pale. Consolidated management, Gavin mumbled. For efficiency. It is very generous of you, Miles said, unfolding his napkin. Taking on fiduciary responsibility for family is a heavy burden, especially in a volatile market. Most asset managers would segregate those funds to avoid conflict of interest. He let the phrase hang in the air. Conflict of interest. Everett turned his gaze to Gavin. I didn't know you were managing personal family estates through the firm. Gavin, I thought your compliance officer flagged that as a risk last quarter. Gavin reached for his water glass. His hand was trembling. I watched the water ripple. It is a separate entity, Gavin lied. Completely ring-fenced. Just a favor for my parents. Of course, Everett said. But he didn't pick up his fork. He looked at Miles. So, Miles, what brings you out of semi-retirement? I heard you were consulting on that massive fraud case in Chicago. I keep busy, Miles said, accepting a menu from the waiter. I find that as long as there are people trying to defy the laws of mathematics, there is work for me. I am currently looking into a very interesting case of collateral inflation. It is amazing what people think they can hide in a spreadsheet. Gavin dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Slippery fingers, Gavin muttered, his face flushing red. Excuse me. Celeste, sitting across from me, had not said a word. She was watching me. Celeste was a woman who survived on instinct. She knew the social hierarchy better than anyone. For years, she had looked at me with pitying amusement. But tonight, there was no amusement. She looked at my suit. She looked at Miles Ketteridge, the heavy hitter sitting at my right hand. She looked at Gavin, sweating through his shirt. She leaned forward slightly. That is a beautiful suit, Briar, Celeste said softly. Is it new? It is, I said, meeting her eyes. I decided it was time to dress for the job I actually have, not the one you all think I have. And what job is that? Celeste asked. Waste management, I said, taking a sip of my water. Cleaning up messes. Celeste flinched. She understood. She looked at Gavin, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of calculation in her eyes. She was wondering if the lifeboat had enough room for two, or if she needed to start swimming. The waiter arrived to take orders. I will have the ribeye, Gavin said loudly, trying to reclaim the room, and a bottle of the Cabernet, the reserve list. Excellent choice, the waiter said. And for the lady? The waiter looked at me. I am not hungry, I said, but my brother promised to show us some figures tonight. I believe we are here to celebrate the merger closing on Monday. I looked at Gavin. You mentioned you needed to clear some funds for the vendors. Gavin, did you get that sorted? Gavin froze. He stared at me with pure hatred. He couldn't answer. If he said yes, he admitted he had money, and Everett would wonder why he was begging me for a loan last night. If he said no, he admitted insolvency in front of his partners. It is handled, Gavin ground out. Wonderful, I smiled. Then we can focus on the future. Everett. Gavin tells me this merger is going to triple the valuation of the company. That must be why he felt comfortable leveraging the family home. The table went silent. Marla gasped. Briar, we do not discuss private. Leveraging the home? Everett interrupted, his voice sharp as a razor. He turned to Gavin. You told us your liquidity was from retained earnings and a private equity injection. You didn't tell us you were collateralizing personal real estate. It is a bridge, Gavin said, his voice rising too high. Just a temporary optimization. Breyer is confused. She doesn't understand the terminology. I understand what a mortgage deed looks like, I said quietly. I saw the filing. Gavin, $450,000. 3 months ago. Where is that capital? It is in the firm, Gavin shouted. People at the nearby tables turned to look. In the firm? Miles asked gently. Or in the payroll account to stop your staff from walking out? Gavin stood up. This is ridiculous. I am not going to be interrogated at my own dinner party by my sister and some retired auditor. Everett, Marlene, I apologize. My sister has a history of mental instability. She likes to create drama. He looked at Mom. Mom, tell them Breyer is making this up. Marla looked at Gavin. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at Dad, who was happily buttering a roll, oblivious to the fact that his son was unraveling. Gavin is a good boy, Marla whispered, but her voice shook. She looked at the expensive restaurant, the partners, the man in the charcoal suit. Doubt was finally cracking the surface of her denial. Sit down. Gavin, Everett said. It wasn't a request. If Miles is asking questions about your payroll, I want to hear the answers, because if you are using personal debt to fund operations, our term sheet is void. I am not, Gavin insisted, but he didn't sit. He looked at the door. He wanted to run. I could see the muscles in his legs tensing. He was calculating the distance to the exit. Don't leave, Gavin, I said, checking my watch. We haven't even had the appetizers. And besides, I brought my checkbook. Isn't that what you wanted? I reached into my bag. Gavin stared at the bag. For a split second, hope flared in his eyes. He thought maybe, just maybe, I was bluffing. He thought I might still save him. Sit down, I repeated. Gavin slowly sank back into his chair. He looked small. The master of the universe had shrunk down to the size of a frightened child. Good, Miles said, picking up his menu again. Now, I recommend the sea bass. It is very light. You might want to keep things light. Gavin, indigestion can be terrible when you are under stress. The waiter poured the wine. The liquid was dark red, like blood. Gavin lifted his glass, but he couldn't bring it to his lips. He set it down. I looked at Nolan Rusk, who was sitting at the far end of the table, looking like he wanted to crawl under the tablecloth. He caught my eye. I winked. The trap was shut, the walls were up, and the water was starting to rise. The waiter cleared the appetizers, the clinking of silverware against china sounding like bells tolling in the heavy silence. The air conditioning in the private room was humming, but Gavin was sweating as if he were standing in the center of a blast furnace. I watched a single bead of perspiration track down his temple and disappear into the collar of his starch-white shirt. I decided it was time to tighten the noose. I picked up my wine glass. The crystal was cool against my fingers. I did not drink. Instead, I tapped the side of the glass with my fingernail, a sharp, rhythmic sound that cut through the low murmur of conversation. I would like to propose a toast, I said, my voice calm and carrying easily to the corners of the room. Gavin looked at me, his eyes wide with warning. He was terrified of what I might say, but he was trapped by social convention. He could not tackle me. He could not silence me. He had to sit there and smile. To family, I said, looking directly at my mother, and to the lengths we go to protect the ones we love, to the sacrifices we make in the dark so that others can stand in the light. Marla's eyes welled up with tears. She reached out and squeezed my father's hand. She thought I was surrendering. She thought I was finally reciting the script she had written for me since birth. The dutiful sister bowing down to the golden brother. To family, Marla echoed, her voice thick with emotion. Oh, Breyer, that was beautiful. To family, Gavin muttered, lifting his glass. He drank quickly, swallowing a large gulp of wine, his eyes darting to my purse where he believed the checkbook was hidden. The table settled. The waiter began to pour water. Gavin leaned in toward me, lowering his shoulders so his back blocked Everett's view. That was good, he whispered, his voice a frantic hiss. You did good. Now, the check. Do you have it? I need to deposit it remotely before midnight. I have it, I whispered back. $60,000, he confirmed, his breath smelling of stale alcohol and fear. Make it out to consulting services. It is cleaner that way. I can write the check. Gavin, I said, keeping my voice low, intimate, lethal. But before I hand it over, I need you to answer one question. Just one. Gavin's jaw clenched. What? We discussed this. 10% interest. You get it on Tuesday. I don't care about the interest, I said. I turned my head slightly so I was looking straight into his dilated pupils. I want to know where Dad's money is. Gavin froze. It was not a figure of speech. His entire body went rigid, as if his nervous system had suddenly seized. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like the blood had been siphoned out. I don't know what you are talking about, he said, his lips barely moving. You are confused. $450,000, I said. 3 months ago, you took it. Where is it sitting right now? Gavin, show me the account. Stop it, he hissed. Not here. You are drunk. I turned away from him. I looked at my father. Hank was staring at the breadbasket, looking lost. He had not touched his wine. Dad, I said gently. Hank looked up, startled. Yes, Briar? Dad, do you remember going to the bank with Gavin in August? I asked. My voice was conversational, light, but it landed on the table like a grenade. The bank? Hank furrowed his brow. He looked at Gavin, seeking the answer, seeking the script. I don't know. Did we go to the bank, son? Gavin slammed his hand down on the table. It wasn't hard enough to break glass, but it was hard enough to stop every conversation in the room. Dad is tired, Gavin snapped, his voice cracking. Why are you doing this? Why are you interrogating him? This is a celebration. I am just asking a question, I said, unblinking. Dad, do you remember signing a paper that gave Gavin the house? The house? Hank's mouth fell open. Panic flickered in his eyes. The primal fear of the elderly who realize their safety is slipping away. No, I didn't give away the house. We paid for the house. Marla? Tell her. Marla slammed her fork down. Her face was flushed with anger. Briar, that is enough. You are twisting things. You are making him confused on purpose. Gavin is handling the estate. He is optimizing the assets. Why do you have to be so cruel? I am not being cruel. Mom, I said, I am being accurate. At the other side of the table, Everett Thorne had stopped eating. He was a man who had spent 40 years in mergers and acquisitions. He knew the smell of rot. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and placed it on the table. Gavin, Everett said. His voice was very quiet, very deep. Why is your sister asking about the house? You listed your personal real estate portfolio as the primary collateral for our liquidity bridge. You said those properties were in your name. They are, Gavin said, turning to Everett, his smile now a rictus of panic. Technically, it is a trust structure. My father is the beneficiary, but I have the executive power. It is standard. Briar just doesn't understand the legal terminology. It sounds like your father doesn't understand it either, Marlene said, her eyes narrowing. He just said he didn't know he signed it. He has memory issues, Gavin pleaded. That is why I have the power of attorney, to help him. Power of attorney. Miles Ketteridge spoke up. He said the words as if he were tasting something spoiled. That is a very dangerous tool. Gavin, especially when the principal, your father, is sitting right here and seems unaware of the transactions. In my experience, using a power of attorney to transfer assets from an incapacitated person to the agent's own business accounts is not called optimization, it is called embezzlement. The word hung in the air, embezzlement. I didn't transfer it to myself, Gavin lied. It is in an investment vehicle. Really? I asked. Is the Porsche dealership an investment vehicle? Because I have the transfer receipt. Gavin, $50,000. Direct wire, from the shell company funded by Dad's mortgage. Gavin stared at me. He looked like he had been shot in the gut. He realized then that I wasn't guessing. I had the paper. "You hacked me," he whispered. "I audited you," I corrected. Nolan Rusk, who had been watching this exchange with growing horror, decided this was the moment to be a hero. He thought he could save the vibe. He thought he could remind everyone of the potential profits. "Hey, look," Nolan said, holding up his hands. "Let's all calm down. Details are details, right? The point is the growth." Gavin showed me the projections. He promised me a guaranteed 20% return within 6 months. You cannot get that kind of guarantee anywhere else. If he has to move some family money around to make that happen, well, that is just smart business. The silence that followed was absolute. Everett turned his head slowly to look at Nolan. "He promised you what?" 20%, Nolan said, faltering slightly as he realized he might have said the wrong thing. "Guaranteed, in writing." Everett closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, they were cold as ice. Promising a guaranteed return on an equity investment is a violation of SEC regulations. Everett said, "It is the hallmark of a Ponzi scheme, and if he is using unregistered family funds to pay earlier investors..." Everett stood up. He didn't look at Gavin. He looked at Marlene. "We are done," Everett said. "Wait," Gavin scrambled up, knocking his chair over. "Everett, please. That guy is an idiot. I never promised him that. It was a projection, a theoretical model. The deal is solid. The merger closes Monday." "There is no merger, Gavin," Marlene said, standing up as well. She picked up her clutch. "We pulled the term sheet 3 days ago. We found the debt you were hiding in the subsidiary. We were only here tonight out of politeness to see if you would come clean. Instead, we find out you are defrauding your own father." "No!" Gavin shouted. He grabbed Everett's arm. "You can't walk away. I have the funding. I have the liquidity. Breyer has the check. Breyer, give them the check." He turned to me, his eyes wild, begging, pleading. He needed me to be the sister I used to be. He needed me to be the doormat. "Give them the check," he screamed. I sat perfectly still. I looked at the man who had mocked me in front of 300 people. I looked at the brother who had called me filth. I looked at the son who had sold our parents' safety for a sports car. "I don't have a check for you, Gavin," I said softly. "I never did." Gavin's face crumbled. The reality hit him. There was no money. There was no merger. There was no escape. "You set me up," he whispered. "I just turned on the lights," I said. My mother was sobbing now, clutching my father's arm. "Gavin, what are they saying? What is happening?" "It is over, Mom," I said, not looking away from Gavin. Gavin looked around the room. Everett and Marlene were walking toward the door. Nolan was staring at his phone, probably deleting text messages. Miles was calmly finishing his wine. Gavin was alone. He was standing in the wreckage of his own life, and there was nowhere left to run. I reached under the table. I felt the cool metal of my phone. I opened the message thread with Rowan Hale. I typed one word. Start. I hit send. I looked at Gavin one last time. "You should have let me stay in the mud," I said. The doors to the private dining room opened, but it wasn't the waiters coming back with the main course. The double doors of the private dining room did not burst open. They swung inward with a heavy, deliberate slowness that commanded more attention than a slam ever could. 2 men stepped inside. One was a uniformed officer, standing back near the entrance to secure the perimeter. The other was Rowan Hale. Rowan looked exactly as I remembered him from the federal contracting sites. Square-jawed, calm, and radiating the kind of quiet authority that makes loud men nervous. He was wearing a dark suit that fit poorly across his broad shoulders, a stark contrast to the tailored Italian wool Gavin was wearing. But the badge clipped to his belt caught the light of the chandelier and held it. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum before the air rushes in. Gavin stood up. His chair screeched against the floor. a jagged sound that made Celeste flinch. He adjusted his cufflinks, a reflex of vanity even as the walls were closing in. "Gentlemen," Gavin said, his voice pitching too high, trying to summon the arrogance that had protected him his entire life. "This is a private event. You are interrupting a dinner with key investors. If this is about the noise, I can assure you—" "Gavin Callahan?" Rowan asked. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was flat, professional, and devoid of any negotiation. "Yes, I am Gavin Callahan," my brother said, forcing a tight, white smile. "And I am going to have to ask you to wait outside until we are finished with our dessert course. My attorney will—" Rowan stepped forward, ignoring the bluster completely. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the table, right next to Gavin's untouched ribeye. "I am Agent Hale with the Financial Crimes Task Force," Rowan said. "We are not here for a noise complaint. We are here to execute a warrant for the seizure of electronic devices and business records related to the operations of Callahan Strategic Holdings." Gavin laughed. It was a wet, desperate sound. "That is ridiculous. This is a misunderstanding, a clerical error. My compliance team is—" "We are also here," Rowan continued, his voice hardening, "to question you regarding a concurrent investigation into wire fraud, bank fraud, and the violation of the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act." The air left the room. Marla, who had been holding her napkin to her mouth, let out a small, strangled whimper. "Elder abuse? What are you talking about? Gavin loves his parents." Rowan turned his gaze to my mother. He didn't look at her with malice, but with the exhausted patience of a man who has seen too many families destroyed by greed. "Ma'am," Rowan said softly, "we have traced multiple unauthorized transfers from your husband's accounts to a shell company controlled by your son. We have evidence that a mortgage was secured on your primary residence under false pretenses, involving a signatory who lacks the cognitive capacity to consent." He gestured to my father. Hank was sitting perfectly still, clutching his bread roll. He looked from Rowan to Gavin, his eyes wide and frightened. He didn't understand the legal words, but he understood the tone. He understood that the man in the dark suit was looking at his son like he was a criminal. "Gavin?" Hank whispered. "Son, did you do something bad?" Gavin looked at Dad. For a second, I thought he might apologize. I thought he might break. But Gavin was a creature of ego. "They are lying, Dad!" Gavin shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Rowan. "They are trying to sabotage the merger. It is a setup. Breyer put them up to this. She is jealous. She wants to ruin us." Everett Thorne stood up. He didn't look at Gavin. He looked at Miles Ketteridge. Miles reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a slim blue folder, the forensic summary I had compiled with Cal Huxley. He slid it across the white tablecloth until it rested in front of Everett. "The summary of the liquidity gap," Miles said calmly, "including the timestamps of when the family assets were liquidated to cover payroll. It is all there. Everett, the company is a ghost. There is no money. There is only debt and theft." Everett opened the folder. He read the first page. It took him 5 seconds. He closed the folder. He looked at Marlene. "We are leaving," Everett said. His voice was like a gavel striking wood. "Everett, wait!" Gavin lunged forward, grabbing Everett's sleeve. "Read the projections. Look at the future value. Don't look at the past." Everett pulled his arm away with a look of pure disgust. "There is no future value in fraud, Gavin, and I do not do business with men who steal from their senile fathers. It is a moral hazard I cannot explain to my board." Marlene stood up, grabbing her purse. "I am going to recommend that the Compliance Committee blacklist your firm by morning. Gavin, good luck." They walked out. They didn't look back. They walked past the police officer as if he were part of the furniture. Nolan Rusk was sitting at the end of the table, his face the color of ash. He realized he had just bragged about a guaranteed 20% return to a room full of witnesses. He stood up slowly, trying to make himself invisible. I have to go," Nolan stammered. I didn't know. I swear. Briar. I didn't know. I didn't even look at him. He wasn't worth the energy. Gavin was alone now. The investors were gone. The facade was gone. He turned to Marla. Mom, please, tell them. Tell them I had permission. Tell them it was a loan. You knew, right? You knew we were optimizing. Marla looked at her son. For the first time in 37 years. She didn't see the golden boy. She saw the sweat. She saw the lies. She saw the man who had looked at her husband, a man who had worked in a factory for 40 years to pay off his home, and seen nothing but a line of credit to be exploited. You said it was safe, Marla whispered, her voice breaking. You said you were taking care of us. I was, Gavin screamed. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. You didn't need time, Gavin, I said. I stood up. My legs felt strong. The shaking in my hands was gone. I walked around the table until I was standing next to my father. I put my hand on his shoulder. He reached up and gripped my fingers, holding on tight, like a drowning man finding a raft. You didn't need time, I repeated, my voice steady and filling the room. You needed a victim, and you chose the easiest targets you could find. I reached into my bag and pulled out a heavy document. It wasn't evidence. It was a solution. This, I said, placing it on the table, is a copy of the emergency guardianship petition I filed this morning, and this is the deposit slip for the new trust account I opened an hour ago. Gavin stared at the papers. What? I liquidated my equipment fund, I said. $200,000. It is not enough to pay off the mortgage you took out, but it is enough to cover the payments and keep the bank away for 2 years while the lawyers tear your life apart to get the rest back. I also hired a forensic accountant to trace every cent you moved. We will find it. Gavin, if you hid it in crypto, if you hid it in offshore shells, if you bought watches or cars, we will find it. We will seize it, and we will sell it to pay Dad back. Celeste let out a sob. She covered her face with her hands. She knew what that meant. The condo, the cars, the lifestyle. It was all about to be auctioned off. Gavin looked at the document. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wet. The arrogance finally broke. He looked small. He looked like the little brother who used to ask me to help him tie his shoes. Briar, he whispered. Briar, please, don't do this. I can fix it. I just need a chance. I am your brother. It was the first time in years he had said my name without a sneer. He was begging. I looked at him, and I felt a wave of sadness. Not for him, but for the time we had wasted. For the family we could have been if he hadn't decided that love was a currency to be spent. I know you are my brother, I said softly, and that is why I am stopping you, because nobody else loved you enough to tell you no. I turned to Rowan. Agent Hale, I said. He is all yours. Rowan nodded. He motioned to the uniformed officer. Gavin Callahan, Rowan said. Please come with us. We have a car waiting. Gavin didn't fight. The fight had left him the moment the partners walked out the door. He slumped, his shoulders collapsing. He let the officer guide him toward the exit. As he passed me, he stopped. He looked at my boots, the imaginary boots he always saw, even when I was wearing heels. I am sorry, he choked out. Don't tell me, I said. Tell the judge. They walked him out. The doors swung shut behind him, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in the wake of his destruction. Marla was weeping openly now, her head in her hands. Celeste was staring at the tablecloth, frozen in shock. I pulled my chair closer to my father. I sat down. Hank looked at the empty doorway where his son had just vanished. Then he turned his confused, watery eyes to me. Briar? He asked, his voice trembling. Is he coming back? Not for a long time, Dad, I said. What are we going to do? He whispered. The bank, the papers. I took both of his hands in mine. They were rough, calloused hands that had worked hard to build a life that Gavin had tried to tear down in 3 months. I squeezed them. I have it handled. Dad, I said. The house is safe. The accounts are locked. I am taking over. But your job, Marla sniffled, looking up with red, swollen eyes. You dig ditches. Briar, how can you handle this? I looked at my mother. Even now. She couldn't help it. But it didn't hurt anymore. It just felt like an old song I didn't need to listen to. I don't just dig ditches, Mom, I said, my voice firm, final, and absolute. I build foundations that don't collapse, and right now, I am the only thing standing between this family and the ground. I poured a glass of water and placed it in my father's hand. He took a sip, and for the first time all night, his shoulders relaxed. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of recognition, not of the daughter who played in the mud, but of the woman who had just saved his life. Thank you, Briar, he whispered. I looked around the empty, expensive room. The crystals still sparkled. The view of the lake was still breathtaking, but the pretense was gone. They had mocked me for being dirty. They had laughed at my work. But as I sat there, holding my father's hand while the sirens began to wail faintly in the distance, I realized something. Dirt washes off, but shame? Shame lasts forever. And for the first time in my life, nobody was laughing. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Lila Revenge Stories. If you enjoyed this journey, please like the video, hit that hype button to help us reach more people, and leave a comment below telling us where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts.